settlement quickly failed on hard times. His son-in-law, placed in command, engaged in abusive exploitation of its Native American neighbors, provoking attacks that drove the community to its ships and safety in St. Augustine, Havana, and Spain. Although reoccupied in 1577, Santa Elena never recovered the promise that it had between 1571 and 1576. Its advantages as a beginning point for expansion into the interior were neglected by men who had no capital and less entrepreneurial drive. As well, they lacked sufficient numbers of soldiers to subdue the Native Americans of the interior who had rebelled against and killed Juan Pardo's men in 1568. Now, such an attack could have been justified, if barely, as punishment for rebellion, and could have led to a permanent Spanish occupation of an area with real advantages for agricultural exploitation. And who knows, they might even have found those gold placers. And finally, however, in 1587, Santa Elena's population was consolidated into St. Augustine's. The development of the Franciscan missions along the Georgia coast and inland in Florida after 1590 precluded the sort of abusive entrepreneurial exploitation of the province's Native American peoples that flourished in other parts of the empire. The missionaries zealously guarded the labor and lands of their charges and did their best to make sure that civilians and soldiers followed royal policies protecting both from abuse. The friars themselves, however, seem to have thought nothing of demanding Indian labor and its fruits, and of condoning the use of Indians as porters, carrying supplies along the road from St. Augustine to Appalachia. Then, or rather when, in the early 17th century, first the Wale, and then the Timucua and the Appalachian began to provide labor gangs, those gangs only cultivated the maize fields around St. Augustine and aided in the construction of Castillo de San Marcos, rather than working to produce an export product, at least as far as we know they did. Something to be found. Their labor did help to move the colony toward food security, but it was not an advantage to build on. Two, Native American numbers were becoming thin as epidemics swept the mission villages and the backcountry. Absent a cash crop like tobacco that would have justified the purchase of Africans to replace the Native Americans, the best that entrepreneurially inclined men living in Florida could do in the second half of the 17th century was to run cattle in areas somewhat remote from the mission villages and to organize a small trade between St. Mark's and Havana in Indian-produced food, and probably deerskins as well being traded in by the people that were later known as the Creek. Ruiz de Salazar went a bit further with his wheat farm and ranch near Arcila, which is southeast of modern Tallahassee, but the local chief and the friars dismantled that enterprise as soon as he lost office. So in spite of the potential advantages that the interior southeast offered, and which were mostly known to the Spaniards, they exploited only the crown's payroll and the limited Native American agricultural labor in patterns that enriched a few men, but failed to provide incentives for others to pile on and so accumulate advantage. This story of Florida as a field for entrepreneurial activity has hardly been told, except for Gene Lyon's book on Menendez. It is, I would suggest, a quintessential American story, although seldom recognized as one because of what happened after 1576. It is an American story because one of the characteristics of our national history is entrepreneurial activity. You don't have to be a Republican to believe that. Spaniards, no less than Englishmen, brought that spirit to these shores. So these are a few thoughts about aspects of La Florida's story that are still largely untold. Thank you all for coming. There will be a quiz later for those of you who would reply. And as the Spaniards would have said, who's ultra? Let's go beyond the familiar to explore the parts of the story that are still largely untold, and let's strive to place La Florida fully into the narrative on the origins of these United States. Thank you very much.